There's a moment in the Bible that almost nobody talks about. Not a miracle, not a battle, not a parting sea or a burning bush. Just a man lying in the dirt, alone at a river crossing in the middle of the night, holding on to someone he cannot see, refusing to let go. And when morning breaks, he stands up with a different name. God does this 4 times in the entire Bible. 4 times, across thousands of years, across dozens of lives, across every category of human failure and human hope. He stops everything and renames someone. Abram becomes Abraham, Sarai becomes Sarah, Jacob becomes Israel, Simon becomes Peter. 4 people, 4 new names. And here's what I want you to notice right now, before we go any further. Not one of them was ready for it. Abraham was renamed at 99 years old with no children, when the new name meant father of many nations. Jacob was renamed in the middle of a fight he didn't start, at a river he was trying to sneak across. Peter was renamed before he had ever been tested, before he knew what he was capable of failing at. In the ancient world, your name was not just what people called you, it was what you were. It was your identity compressed into a single breath of sound. To change a name was to reach into a person's chest and rearrange what was inside. So I want to ask you something before we go any further. What name are you currently carrying that was given to you by someone who was wrong about you? Maybe a parent who told you what you were. Maybe a failure that stuck. Maybe a label that showed up so many times you stopped questioning whether it was true. Because here's what I've noticed in every single name change God makes. He does not wait until the person is worthy of the new name. He gives them the new name in the middle of the mess. He hands them a name they cannot yet inhabit and watches to see whether they will try. Keep that thought close, because by the end of this video, I'm going to show you a 5th name change. One that hasn't happened yet. One that isn't in Genesis or the Gospels. It's in Revelation chapter 2, and according to the text, this one is for you. Personally. Specifically, a name written on a white stone that no one else will ever know. But to understand why that matters, we have to start at the beginning. We have to start with a man sitting in a tent in the desert, 99 years old, being told that his name no longer belongs to him. His name was Abram. In Hebrew, that name carries weight. The English translation almost loses. Abram means exalted father, not just father, exalted, honored, great, which sounds like a meaningful name until you know that Abram had no children. He had a wife named Sarai. He had wealth and reputation and servants and flocks. He had left his hometown of Ur in what is now southern Iraq because a voice told him to go, and he went. He had walked away from everything familiar on nothing but a promise. He had trusted, and he had waited for 24 years. The promise was simple enough, as promises go. God had told Abram, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. Through you, every family on earth will find blessing. Simple, clear, catastrophically unfulfilled. And Abram was now 99 years old. There are names you carry that turn from meaning to wound over time. Abram had been called exalted father for nearly a century. You can imagine what that sounds like after 24 years of waiting. You can imagine the hollow space between the name and the reality. And then God speaks. No longer shall your name be called Abram. Your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I want you to pause on those words for a moment. God says, I have made you. Past tense, present reality. The promise is spoken as though it's already accomplished, while Abraham is still childless, still 99, still standing in a tent in a desert, and now Abraham has to introduce himself with this name. What is your name? Abraham. What does that mean? Father of many nations. You have children? No. That exchange would have happened. Over and over, every time Abraham met someone new, he would have to say his name out loud and carry the gap between what the name claimed and what his life showed. The name was not a reward. It was a practice. It was a daily act of trusting something he could not yet see. Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher who wrote in the 1st century, spent an entire treatise on this moment. He called it On the Change of Names, and he wrote something that stopped me when I first read it. Philo argued that God's name changes in the Bible are never cosmetic. They are ontological. They change the nature of the person, not just the label. In other words, Abraham does not become the father of many nations and then receive the name. He receives the name and then becomes. The name leads. The reality follows. Josephus, writing in his Jewish Antiquities, records that Abraham kept the new name faithfully, introduced himself by it, used it even when it sounded impossible, even when it made him look foolish. For 12 months, he carried the name that felt like a lie. And then Isaac was born. The name that had sounded like a wound for 1 year suddenly sounded like prophecy. But here's what I want you to see, because you are going to see it again in every name change that follows. God does not give the new name when the person is at their best. He gives it when they are at their most impossible, when the gap between who they are and who God says they will become is widest. Because the name is not a description of the present, it is a direction for the future, and walking toward a name you cannot yet inhabit is one of the most uncomfortable things a person can do. I know you know what that feels like, not with a name from God necessarily, but with something someone told you you would be, something you tried to grow into and kept falling short of, something that felt like a promise that the evidence kept contradicting. Abraham lived there for 24 years, and then 12 more, carrying the new name. He didn't arrive instantly. He arrived faithfully. And that is what I want you to hold on to as we move to the second name change, because this one is rougher. This one happens at a river crossing at night, with a man who has been running his whole life finally forced to hold still. Let me stop for a moment and tell you what I think is actually happening underneath these stories. In the ancient Near East, names were not personal accessories. They were binding declarations of power and identity. When a king conquered a city, he renamed it. When a slave was purchased, the owner renamed them. When the Babylonians took Daniel into captivity, the very first thing they did was give him a new name, Belteshazzar, to overwrite his Hebrew self. A name, in that world, was an act of possession, an act of authority. So when God renames someone, He is making a claim. He is saying, I know who you really are, I know who you will become, and I am staking my own name on it. That is not a small thing, and the next name change is not a gentle thing. It happens at midnight, at a ford in the river Jabbok, after a man has spent his entire life running from exactly who he was. His name was Jacob, and Jacob means heel grabber. That is not a metaphor. When Jacob was born, his twin brother Esau came out first, and Jacob came out gripping Esau's heel, trying, even in the moment of birth, to pull him back, to get ahead, to find an advantage where there was none to be found. The midwife saw it. The parents saw it. They named him for what he did, and Jacob spent the next 50 years living up to that name. He deceived his blind father Isaac into giving him the blessing that belonged to Esau. He worked 7 years for the woman he loved, and his uncle tricked him into marrying the wrong sister. He worked 7 more years. He was cheated, and he cheated in return. His whole life was a long sequence of angles and exits and strategies. Even when God appeared to him in a dream, the famous ladder reaching from earth to heaven, angels ascending and descending, Jacob's first response was not worship. It was negotiation. If you do this for me and protect me and bring me home safely, then you will be my God. That is Jacob. Always calculating, always looking for leverage. By the time we reach the night at the Jabbok ford, Jacob is in his 50s. He's returning home to face the brother he betrayed 20 years before. He has sent his wives and children and servants and flocks across the river ahead of him. He's alone on the bank, and a man appears and begins to wrestle with him. The text doesn't explain this. It doesn't tell you where the man came from or what he wanted. It just says they wrestled all night, and Jacob wouldn't let go. And when the man saw that Jacob was not going to break, he reached out and dislocated Jacob's hip with a touch. Still, Jacob held on. "Let me go," the man said. "Day is breaking. I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? And here I need you to feel the full weight of what is being asked." Jacob has been asked this question before. Another man, another tent. His blind father Isaac asked him the same thing. "What is your name?" And Jacob had lied. He had said, "I am Esau." He had stolen the blessing through false identity. He had used the wrong name to claim something that wasn't his. But that was 20 years ago, and this is not his father. So Jacob tells the truth. "Jacob," he says, "my name is Jacob. My name is Heel Grabber. My name is the thing I've been running from and running with my whole life." And the man says, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob. You shall be called Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Yisrael, the name in Hebrew, carries two words, Sarah, to struggle, to contend, to fight, and El, God. Literally, the one who struggles with God. Not the one who won. Not the one who was righteous. Not the one who deserved it. The one who wrestled. The one who refused to let go. The one who stayed in the fight even when it was costing him everything. And Jacob, Israel, asks the man's name in return. The man refuses to give it. He blesses Jacob and disappears. And Jacob names the place Peniel, the face of God, because he says, "I have seen God face to face, and yet I am alive." He walks away, limping. The sun rises. A man named Israel moves into the morning with a dislocated hip and a wound that proves the night actually happened. Do you see the pattern? Abraham had to carry a name that contradicted his reality for 12 months before the promise arrived. Jacob had to confess the name that condemned his past before he could receive the name that defined his future. In both cases, honesty came before the new name. In both cases, the person had to be willing to stand in the gap, to carry the distance between who they had been and who God said they would become, without the guarantee that the gap would ever close. You know what that gap feels like. You have stood in it. Maybe you are standing in it right now. The gap between who you are and who you are trying to be. The gap between the name you've been given and the person you feel like you might actually be underneath it. That gap is not a sign that God has gotten the name wrong. It might be a sign that you are right in the middle of the story, not at the end of it. His name was Simon. Simon means he who hears in Hebrew, or in some translations, reed. Something that bends with the wind, something flexible, something that moves with whatever force is applied to it. He was a fisherman from Galilee. He had rough hands and a loud voice and a brother named Andrew. He was not a scholar. He had never studied in Jerusalem. He was not the person anyone would have listed as a candidate to become the foundation of something that would outlast the Roman Empire. The first time Simon met Jesus, it wasn't even dramatic. His brother Andrew came to him and said, "We have found the Messiah. Come and see." And Andrew brought Simon to Jesus. Jesus looked at him, and without a conversation, without a trial period, without asking permission, Jesus said, "You are Simon the son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which, when translated, means Peter, the rock. In Greek, Petros, rock, stone. The kind of material that holds its shape when pressure is applied. And Simon, a reed, a man who moves with the current, is told that his name is now Rock. He doesn't know yet. He cannot know yet. He has no way of knowing that within 3 years, on the worst night in human history, He will stand in a courtyard around a fire, and 3 times and 3 different strangers who are barely paying attention. He will say the same sentence. I do not know this man. He will deny the person who named him. He will prove, in the most visible way possible, that he is still Simon, still a reed, still someone who bends when the cold gets bad enough and the risk gets real enough. And Jesus knew. Jesus told him in advance, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Notice what Jesus does not pray. He does not pray that Simon won't fall. He prays that when Simon falls, because Jesus already sees it coming, the faith underneath the failure will survive. The name Peter was not given because Simon had demonstrated rock-like qualities. It was given because Jesus could see something in Simon that Simon could not yet see in himself. Not the absence of weakness, the presence of something on the other side of the weakness. After the resurrection, Jesus appears on a beach in Galilee. Simon Peter has gone back to fishing. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He failed in the most personal way a person can fail. He's not sure what he is anymore. Jesus appears on the shore. He has lit a charcoal fire. And that detail matters, because the last charcoal fire Simon Peter stood near was in the courtyard where he denied Jesus 3 times. John is specific about that detail. He uses the same rare Greek word in both places. He wants you to feel the echo. Jesus asks Simon 3 questions. Do you love me? Do you love me? Simon, son of John, do you love me? 1 question for each denial. And then he says, feed my sheep. Not once does Jesus call him by his new name in this conversation. He calls him Simon. He reaches back to the old name, the real name, the name that carries the whole history of failure and fear and love. He does not pretend the denials didn't happen. He names them and forgives them and works through them, and then the rock is back. Not because Simon stopped being someone who could fail, but because the failure has been walked through, and the name can now hold the full weight of the history behind it. Now I want to keep the promise I made at the beginning of this video. I told you there was a 5th name change, one that hasn't happened yet. Open your Bible to Revelation 2:17. Jesus is speaking to one of the 7 churches in Asia Minor, and he makes this promise. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. A white stone. A new name, known only to the one who receives it. In the ancient world, white stones carried 2 specific meanings. A white stone placed in a jury vote meant acquittal, not guilty, set free, and a white stone was used as a token of invitation, the kind of pass that only the bearer could present, written in a way that could not be forged or transferred. So God is making 2 promises in this single image. You are acquitted, and you are personally invited, and on that stone is a name, not the name your parents gave you, not the name your failures gave you, not the name the world decided was most convenient for you to carry, a name that God has been holding in reserve since before you were born, a name that captures who you actually are in a way that no human language, no human relationship, no human history has ever quite managed to get right, and only you will know it. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Abraham carried the name Father of Many Nations through a desert year when it sounded like mockery. Jacob walked away from the Jabbok ford limping, with a name that meant he had struggled with God and survived it. Peter, Simon, spent 30 years growing into a name that had been handed to him before he understood what it would cost. All of them carried the gap. All of them walked toward a name they could not yet inhabit. All of them lived in the distance between who they had been and who they were becoming. and every single one of them received the name in the dark. Before the proof, before the morning, in the middle of the impossibility. The white stone is the final name, the truest one, and it comes at the end, not the beginning. It comes after the desert year and the river crossing and the charcoal fire. It comes after you have carried every impossible name long enough to understand what carrying a name actually costs. There is a question I want to leave you with. What name are you currently carrying that was given to you by someone who didn't know the whole story? A parent who named you from their fear, not from their faith. A failure that attached itself to you so thoroughly you started to believe it was a description. A role you stepped into so long ago you have forgotten it was a choice. The pattern in these 4 name changes does not offer you easy comfort. It does not tell you the gap closes quickly. Abraham waited 24 years before Isaac was born and 12 months after the renaming. Jacob walked away from the Jabbok with a limp he carried for the rest of his life. Peter spent 30 years learning to inhabit the name Rock, and even then, the letters he wrote are full of the awareness of how close he came to never being that person at all. The gap does not close instantly, but it closes, and here is what all 4 of these people have in common. Not that they were ready, not that they were righteous, not that they had earned the new name before it arrived. They held still long enough to receive it. Abraham stopped negotiating long enough to listen. Jacob wrestled through the night and refused to let go even when it cost him his hip. Peter stood on the beach and answered the question honestly 3 times, even though every answer reminded him of the fire in the courtyard. They held still. They told the truth. They carried the name even when it felt like a lie. And somewhere, in a specific moment I cannot see and you cannot predict, the name stopped being a direction and started being a description. That moment is coming for you, and when it does, there will be a white stone on the other side of it, with a name on it that no